Hello, I'm Ron Edwards from ChineseEconomicHistory.com, and we're here today at the World Economic History Congress being held in Kyoto, Japan. This is the first time that the World Economic History Congress has come on this side of the Pacific. So it's quite an occasion for Far Eastern economic historians, and in particular interest for us as Chinese economic historians. So today we have a UCLA PhD candidate who we'd like to interview. Meng Zhang received her bachelor's degree in finance and statistics from Peking University, and she has a master's degree already from UCLA and is working on her dissertation. Initially, her concentration was on the Song Dynasty economic history. And she worked with Richard von Glahn at UCLA, a prominent Song Dynasty expert. But she switched for the dissertation topic to long-distance timber industry trade in from the mid-18th to the mid-19th century. And she's been working with both Bin Wang and Richard von Glahn on this project. So we're happy to have you and welcome you to thank you for having the time to spare for us for an interview. And I'd first like to ask you in general, what more or less in particular did you study initially and later in your PhD program, and what did that lead to?
Well, as you just introduced, I was a finance major for college. So when I developed my interest in economic history and came to UCLA, I really had some time to explore all the interesting topics. So I started with the two small projects of the Song Dynasty, and then I'm very interested in the way in which Chinese long-distance merchants organized their business. So finally, my dissertation project came to be the economic practices and institutions of timber trade along the Yangtze River from the late Qing to the Republican period.
I see. And so that would be, that's around the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century.
To the early 20th century, actually.
Excuse me, 20th century. That's around 1930 you mentioned. Could you please tell us roughly the main parts of your dissertation you're working on?
So I'm looking at the development of timber trade along the Yangtze River. So there are three main points of the dissertation, I would say. First, there is a long-term environmental history angle. I look at where did Jiangnan got its timber, because we all know about the commercialization and urbanization of the Jiangnan area, and it required a lot of timber. For Chinese buildings is mainly by timber. So from the 12th century to the 19th century, we see the shifting to the southwest and increasing reliance on the timber supply from the southwestern part of China. That's one point. And secondly, I'm looking at the ownership structure of mountain land and timber trees, and to discuss how this ownership structure helped the investors on the land to avoid the risks associated with the very long-term growth period of the trees. So they developed a mechanism of the trade of shares to they can cash back on their future revenues anytime they want. They trade the shares independently from the land or the trees themselves.
So there were contracts.
Contracts used as kind of a security.
I see.
Yeah. And thirdly, I look at the economic institutions used by timber traders from along this very long trade route. So how did they deal with a number of problems that they faced in this trade, including transportation costs, including the risks of contract defaults. I'm only looking at the reputation mechanism and information sharing mechanism within merchant communities, and sometimes they have semi-formal organizations among themselves to help them enforce those contracts. So these are the three main aspects of the dissertation so far.
I see. And when do you plan on graduating?
I'm entering my 5th year, so I think I will graduate in the 6th year.
In about roughly 2 years, so
yes.
you'll be on the job market. Well, that sounds very interesting.
Thanks.
And I think this area of Chinese economic research there seems to be quite a bit of data, and it's also very fruitful to learn about these trades and markets, in particular institutions. That's been very popular in economics, trying to learn exactly how markets work and how institutions
yes.
work in this. Okay, well, finally, we at ChineseEconomicHistory.com like to ask a couple questions in general for growth and development economists who are interested in China. And first is, roughly speaking, or generally speaking, based on your knowledge and training recently at UCLA, do you feel that China's long-run economic development path was very similar to the West?
It's very different from the West.
I see. And can you say a little more about what in particular is different? Or your views in general on this?
Well, I would say there are differences and there are similarities. Actually, it's not just China and the West. They are not just the two models of economic growth. I would say there are many models of economic development if we look around the world and look at their historical economic histories. So if we compare China to the West, you can see that so there is a sequence of developments that we see in Western Europe. If you summarize it, abstract it, and then apply that to Chinese history, you see some of the things that developed late actually developed earlier in China, and some of the things that developed earlier in Europe came late in China, or if we talk about democracy, it's not there yet.
Sure.
So I think I'm pretty much persuaded that there is no single sequence of development.
Okay, so in particular, I can just summarize at least a very traditional view of Western growth theorists, growth and development economists, that a typical pattern of a country is to go from a Malthusian trap where increases in productivity are realized in population growth. This Malthusian trap gave way to long-run economic growth, and in general, you don't see this happening in China, fitting this strictly speaking, this traditional view.
Right.
Okay. Finally, my own interest, and I can't resist asking you, and you worked with Richard von Glahn at UCLA, who's a Song Dynasty expert, so I've been exposed to some of the most recent research. What is your view of the economic performance of Song China?
Well, I would say the economy of the Song Dynasty was very lively, and I see a lot of innovations, not only in terms of technology, but also economic institutions and in the way in which the state interacted with the economy. So the Tang Song period stands out. In a lot of ways, it's a contrast to what happened in the late imperial period. I think during the Tang Song period, you see a very healthy sponsoring relationship between the state and the economy, and there's a lot of development, I would say.
And less so in the later imperial period.
I'm not saying the late imperial period there was no growth. I'm talking about
The state.
yes, the way in which the state interacted with the economy. So during the late imperial period, the state was more held back. Part of the reason was the income of the state in comparison to the economy became very small.
Okay, and so just to finally be clear, so we understand the language in history and economic growth and development is sometimes a bit different. By economic growth, do you mean growth in per capita income and population during the Song Dynasty?
Yeah, I'm very aware of the nuances of the terminology. So I said economic development, but based on the secondary scholarship that I read about the Song period, I am persuaded that there's population growth and also increase in per capita income.
Okay. Okay, well, these are the main questions we were interested in having you over, and we're very glad to hear about your dissertation and wish you luck in a couple years and looking for a job.
Much.
And especially for taking your time off to come up here and have interview us. So again, these interviews will be available on ChineseEconomicHistory.com, and we'd like to wish Meng Zhang an enjoyable time at the World Economic History Congress here for the next few days.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you.